Buongiorno a tutti, grazie di questa gioia di vedere questa sala piena di persone interessate. Noi avevamo un po' di paura che questo tema impaurisse in qualche modo, invece vedo che ogni volta che si parla di responsabilità le persone a questo punto sono molto attente, e la responsabilità riguardo alla salute credo che sia una delle cose che interessano di più le nostre vite, perché sono quelle che è una responsabilità che abbiamo nei nostri confronti e nei confronti della società in cui viviamo, di tutelare e di aiutare e di aiutarci a vivere al meglio le nostre vite. E quindi questo coinvolge molti temi, coinvolge il tema del nostro rapporto con le istituzioni, coinvolge il tema di come fondazioni come la Fondazione Cassa di Risparmio, che qui rappresento, o File, che rappresento lo stesso perché in fondo è la mia anima, lavorino in questo campo, e come si debbano in qualche modo integrare e fare un lavoro che complementarmente sia utile per la società. Bene, io ho l'onore di presentare oggi la dottoressa Heath. Credo che poi ne parlerà Alfredo Zuppiroli, ma presenterò anche lui. Iona Heath ha lavorato e lavora in Inghilterra come medico di famiglia ed è già presidente del Royal College of General Practitioners, quindi del collegio generale dei medici, e presidente del comitato etico del British Medical Journal. Quindi si intende di etica, si intende di sanità, si intende di assistenza. Ha scritto un libro, il libro per cui io l'ho conosciuta è un libro che è uscito vari anni fa, che si chiama Modi di morire, quindi perché chiaramente la mia anima File e di cure palliative era molto interessata a questo tema. Invece quest'anno o l'anno scorso, non mi ricordo, ha pubblicato questo libro contro il mercato della medicina, il rendere attraverso medicamenti, cioè fare ricchezza attraverso la medicina, quindi un approccio molto critico. Oggi parlerà, credo, un po' di tutto, parlerà anche della sua esperienza in Inghilterra, quindi è abbastanza interessante vedere come altri paesi si sono mossi. Alfredo Zuppiroli la presenterà e probabilmente farà delle domande e indirizzerà questa conversazione. Alfredo Zuppiroli è cardiologo, è stato primario qui a Santa Maria Nuova, è una persona che io come File conosco da 20 anni e che si è sempre occupato della cardiologia in ogni stadio, e ha sempre voluto che la cardiologia, come non era prima, facesse parte delle cure palliative, ovvero che le cure palliative potessero curare anche malati oncologici, perché inizialmente le cure palliative erano riservate solo a malati oncologici e non cardiologici. Si sono aperte poi dal 2012 in realtà, ma insomma poi in realtà da un po' da dopo, ma insomma la realtà è che adesso le cure palliative sono dedicate a tutti i malati oncologici, neurologici, cardiologici, polmonari, quindi c'è molto più lavoro e anche molta più attenzione, perché a seconda delle varie patologie c'è un'attenzione diversa al fine vita. Alfredo fa parte del nostro comitato scientifico di File, è una persona che crede molto alla relazione, ritiene che la relazione sia alla base del processo di cura, e poi è chiaro ci vuole la professionalità, diciamo, scientifica del medico che sa dosare, no? Però la base di questo è la relazione, e questo si ritorna a quello che poi è successo pochi giorni fa, cioè se Dio vuole la legge che è uscita sulle DAT, che è una legge che in qualche modo dà la possibilità, attraverso proprio una relazione tra medico-paziente o paziente-equipe e familiari, di poter decidere di se stessi, e credo che questo sia un grande punto a cui noi siamo arrivati. Bene, vi auguro una... vi devo dare due notizie. Allora, che ci saranno i nostri ultimi 3 incontri che saranno al Nicolini, e sarà Don Virgilio Colmegna che sarà responsabilità, parlerà di responsabilità e l'accoglienza, Piovani il 17 marzo che parlerà responsabilità e la musica, e infine il 24 marzo Sabino Cassese, che penso conosciate tutti, che parlerà di responsabilità e diritti. Io credo che abbiamo cercato di coprire un po' tutti i temi, e spero che anche quest'anno sia stato per voi un momento di riflessione che vi sia servito. E poi un'altra comunicazione, che a Villa Bardini, e questo per i nonni credo, ma non solo per i nonni, per tutti, ci sarà l'inaugurazione il 13 febbraio fino al 3 giugno di questa mostra che è Pinocchio, Harry Potter e Topolino, Heidi e tutti gli altri, tratti dalla collezione Salani. Credo che possa essere per i bambini un momento divertente, e niente, forse anche per noi grandi, che qualche volta non ci fa male tornare bambini. Grazie e buon ascolto.
Bene, buongiorno a tutti, benvenuti, grazie di essere con noi stamani. Ringrazio Donatella della presentazione, ringrazio la Fondazione Cassa di Risparmio per avermi invitato a presentare un personaggio molto importante, molto conosciuta non solo in Europa ma direi veramente in tutto il mondo. Ieri sera, parlando con Iona Heath e chiedendole come aveva piacere che io la presentassi, lei mi ha risposto medico di famiglia. E in questo family doctor, in questo famiglia, c'è tutto un senso dell'importanza della relazione, del contestualizzare, del conoscere il malato e non soltanto la malattia. Privilegio, direi, che è riservato soltanto ai medici di famiglia, ai medici di medicina generale, perché noi specialisti ospedalieri purtroppo siamo spesso troppo allontanati, gioco forza, dal conoscere proprio il contesto sociale, l'esperienza, in una parola quella che si chiama la biografia di una persona insieme alla biologia. Poi Iona Heath è molto di più che medico di famiglia, già Donatella ci ha ricordato i suoi ruoli istituzionali come presidente di tutti i medici del Servizio Sanitario Britannico, il comitato etico del British Medical Journal. Ha scritto molti libri, i 2 citati da Donatella sono i 2 tradotti in italiano, Modi di morire e Contro il mercato della salute, però ha scritto moltissimi altri libri in lingua inglese sulle medical humanities, sulla comunicazione medico-paziente, tutti sempre centrati sull'importanza, come ci ricordava Donatella, della relazione e del tempo da dedicare alla relazione. Non voglio prendere altro tempo perché siamo qui tutti per ascoltare Iona Heath, e il tempo che guadagniamo ora poi ce lo ritroviamo dopo per una discussione che spero sia feconda. Quindi do senz'altro la parola a Iona Heath, ringraziandola di essere qui con noi oggi. Grazie Iona.
Thank you very, very much indeed. It's an enormous privilege for me to be here. It's always wonderful to come to Italy, and perhaps particularly to Florence. And thank you so much for coming out so early on a Saturday morning. I'm not sure I would be so dedicated. Thank you. These are very difficult times to be a British citizen. So I must start by apologising for my government, which is unbelievably incompetent and irresponsible. At home, our only comfort comes from political cartoons, and like this one, which shows various options for Theresa May's leap off the cliff into the unknown. But I'm not here to talk about responsibility and politics, which is probably just as well. My subject is responsibility and health, and I plan to spend most of my time discussing responsibility in the context of the meeting between an individual patient and an individual doctor. This meeting is the foundation of medicine. It could be any healthcare professional, but as you have heard, I have spent 35 years of my life working as a doctor, and that is my only expertise. Then I will briefly touch on the issue of responsibility in relation to the health of society and to the health of the planet. To return to politics for a moment, this is the American statesman Alexander Hamilton, painted by John Trumbull in 1801. And in the Federalist Papers, published in 1787, in the early years of the independent United States of America, Hamilton wrote this: "Responsibility, in order to be reasonable, must be limited to objects within the power of the responsible party." Hamilton was, of course, an immensely skillful politician. And this is an intensely political statement. He is seeking to limit the responsibility of politicians. But this is never an option for doctors and other healthcare professionals, despite the fact that we very often try to set such limits and are very often encouraged to do so by healthcare systems and policy. There is too much within healthcare that is uncertain or unknowable to make the imposition of such limits possible. The patient demands our presence and engagement. We are vulnerable to his or her agenda and to the unknowability of what is to come. These authors are reflecting on the philosophy of this man. This is Emmanuel Levinas, and another great thinker, the sociologist Zygmunt Bauman, introduces Levinas and his philosophy. As the greatest ethical philosopher of our century, that's the last century, Emmanuel Levinas puts, as he puts it, morality means being for the other. To take a moral stance means to take responsibility for the other, to act on the assumption that the well-being of the other is a precious thing, calling for my effort to preserve and enhance it. So for everybody, for all of us, to take a moral stance means to take responsibility for the other. And so this surely must be even more true for doctors and other healthcare professionals. Yet how do professionals undertake this being for the fundamentally unknowable other in each of our patients? We must do it by being open and vulnerable ourselves, and we can only do this face to face. Levinas claims that we feel responsibility even from the smallest face-to-face interactions. And Tolstoy provided a powerful illustration of this truth in the interaction between Pierre and Marshal Davout in War and Peace, when he writes this: "At the first glance, when Davout had only raised his head from the papers where human affairs and lives were indicated by numbers, Pierre was merely a circumstance, and Davout could have shot him without burdening his conscience with an evil deed. But now he saw in him a human being." Within contemporary medicine and healthcare, human lives are also indicated by numbers, which serves to distance them. And this distance can too easily shield us from the immediate responsibility of the face-to-face. But if we let this happen, we fail. It is by raising our heads from the numbers on bits of paper and on computer screens, by looking and seeing, that we allow ourselves to see the other, not merely as a circumstance, but as a uniquely suffering person. We all recognize certain injuries that almost invariably cause suffering. The death or suffering of loved ones, powerlessness, helplessness, hopelessness, torture, the loss of a life's work, deep betrayal, physical agony, isolation, homelessness, memory failure, and unremitting fear. Each touches features common to us all, yet each contains features that must be defined in terms of a specific person at a specific time. Medical science and technology has almost nothing to offer in the face of almost all these modes of suffering, but responding to them remains absolutely fundamental to clinical work. And to respond adequately, we must see the suffering in terms of the specific person at a specific time. Pasternak's Dr. Zhivago knows this. The mystery of the individual is precisely what must be put into the facts to make them meaningful. So where have we gone wrong? Biomedical science has produced enormous benefits for humanity. But this has tended to obscure the fact that science has not only been a force for good, but also a cause of substantial harm. Many of the problems within contemporary healthcare have their roots in a very persistent strand of positivism within biomedicine and healthcare policy. Positivists believe that progress in science and progress in ethics and politics go together, and that as scientific knowledge advances and becomes more systematically organized, human values will increasingly converge. Today, almost the only people who appear to retain a belief in this positivist convergence of science, ethics, and politics are some of those working in medical science and some politicians in rich Western nations. The rest of us know that science, ethics, and politics have long since parted company, and that the ethics of scientific research in medicine has been deeply compromised by vested interest and greed. Yet the undoubted achievements of biomedicine have tended to blind us to its limits and its harms, and the success tempts us all the time to apply technical solutions to the profound existential problems of finding meaning in the face of the human inevitabilities of suffering, loss, and death. Such a project is profoundly irresponsible and doomed to costly failure because it ignores the realities of the human condition. The great myth of biomedicine and healthcare policy is that everyone sharing a diagnostic label is essentially the same and should be treated in the same standardized way. And further, that doctors are also interchangeable. Any doctor will do, and the subjectivity of both the patients and their doctors have been completely marginalized, and the importance of the intersubjective relationship between doctor and patient has been similarly ignored, to the great detriment of patients and doctors alike. At the launch event for this book in 2007, the British educationalist Della Fish spoke about professionalism, and not just medical professionalism, and she spoke about it being epistemology plus ontology, which of course I didn't understand. Put more simply, what you know and who you are. Medical education, at least in my country, has concentrated almost entirely on what doctors know and neglected to pay real attention to who they are in terms of their unique histories, personalities, vulnerabilities, etc., etc. This neglect of ontology and subjectivity minimizes the fundamental importance of relationships in the delivery of healthcare that you were talking about, and indeed in the creation and the relief of illness and suffering. I can't read all this, but there are important differences between what is called transactional care on the left and relational care on the right. But these are not mutually exclusive. Aspects of transactional care are frequently needed, but the importance of relational care has been neglected as healthcare has become inexorably more standardized, more bureaucratized, and more commodified. Just to pick out a few, in transactional care, professionals are seen as givers or suppliers of services. In relational care, professionals recognize that in their encounters with patients, they both give and receive. In transactional care, the focus is on counting and calculation. This can be seen as objective. In relational care, the focus is on thoughtful, purposeful judgment. This is necessarily subjective. In transactional care, reflection is on facts and figures. In relational care, reflection is on feelings and ethics. So I hope you can see that transactional care is founded on epistemology, on what we know, relational care on ontology, on who we are. And in transactional care, responsibility for the quality of care lies within the system, and it's dispersed and fragmented, whereas responsibility for relational care is always focused and always personal. Whatever the context, healthcare professionals feel their way on the edges of the unknown. They endlessly create, negotiate, and develop meanings. Engage all the time with multiple activities, factors, and perspectives. Ceaselessly formulate problems and solutions, and learn to live with the insoluble, the ephemeral, the tentative, and the incomplete. The doctor is involved the instant the patient is asked to tell his or her story. This moment is the ever-recurring constitution of whole-person medicine. The whole person is suggested through the ambiguity and incompleteness of the story. Heaps of facts about a person never make a whole. There is always more to learn. Interest sharpens the senses of the doctor at the horizons of unknowing. This is one of the extraordinary photos taken by the Swiss photographer Jean Moore for his book with John Berger entitled A Fortunate Man, an account of a country doctor in England in the 1960s. In the book, Berger insists that individual and closely intimate recognition is required on both a physical and psychological level. The practice of medicine always depends on the ability to make a connection between the generalizations of biomedical science and the unique individual experience of illness and disease. This 33-year-old young woman, Joanna Hedver, is a new source of understanding for me. She is an American writer, artist, and activist who lives with chronic illness, both physical and mental, although that distinction between physical and mental is a peculiarly useless distinction. All illness, disease, and suffering affects both body and mind. She had a damaging and abusive childhood, and she knows about this urgent need for recognition. Just last month, she published a letter to a young doctor while an inpatient in a hospital in Germany with a relapse of a serious depressive illness. And she writes, "The distance is huge, obscured, and unbreachable, but there's a special terror in it, because the distance is often right in front of you, between your face and your doctor's, as you sit in the small examination room together. It can feel like you're speaking a language that your doctor not only can't understand, but doesn't care to hear." This is a shocking indictment. All healthcare begins with a story told by a patient. And Levinas would insist that the doctor has a fundamental ethical responsibility to hear and to strive to understand. Joanna Hedver rejects the normative, cure-orientated nature of so much contemporary healthcare and its disregard for the realities of chronic illness. She writes, "I think the profession of a healer is not a practice that facilitates attaining or obtaining wholeness forever, but a practice of bearing witness to all the parts that have been apart, are apart, and will remain apart." And she has this telling definition of trust. Trust is not a permanent state that can be attained, but only a sign of the possibility that unbearable things can be bearable. For me, she evokes the wisdom of Samuel Beckett and the way his writing consistently reminds us that most people most of the time want to live forever, but most people some of the time and some people most of the time do not want to live forever. How are these latter groups to be accommodated within a system whose only priority is prolonging survival? Many doctors have had a conversation with a patient, usually but not necessarily quite old, who insists that they will never again agree to go to a hospital. They are asking for a completely different approach to healthcare. Indeed, it is well to remember that all lives have the capacity to oscillate between happiness and despair, as Rebecca West, the young Rebecca West here, confirms. Only a part of us is sane. Only a part of us loves pleasure and the longer day of happiness, wants to live to our 90s and die in peace in a house that we built that shall shelter those that come after us. The other half of us is nearly mad. It prefers the disagreeable to the agreeable, loves pain and its darker night despair, and wants to die in a catastrophe that will set back life to its beginnings and leave nothing of our house save its blackened foundations. Medicine needs the capacity to engage with both these halves, or else it will become marginal to the realities of many people's lives. Yet the medical mind is too often like the economic mind described by American philosopher Martha Nussbaum. The economic or the medical mind finds it easy to view the lives of human beings as a problem in relatively elementary mathematics that has a definite solution, ignoring the mystery and complexity within each life, in its puzzlement and pain about its choices, in its tangled loves, in its attempt to grapple with the mysterious and awful fact of its own mortality. I say again, we have learnt an enormous amount by studying groups of individuals and discovering much about the biology that they hold in common, without fully acknowledging that information derived from the study of populations can tell us about probability, but nothing about the fate of any particular individual. And the risk is that we are carried away by our knowledge of populations and lose sight of the unique experience of the particular individual in front of us. Writing about the development and use of psychological tests, Tor Johan Ekeland, a Norwegian professor of psychology, describes such measurements as turning individuals into knowledge as objects of a hierarchical and normative gaze. The individuality is no longer unique and beyond knowledge, but can be known, mapped, calibrated, evaluated, quantified, predicted, and managed. Our perception and our understanding of real lives goes missing. We lose interest in the mystery of their lives and situations, and the complex ways in which biography affects biology. Biological variation is simply appropriated to the causes of commercial profit and of lifestyle and political conformities. Doctors may not be driving this process, but they are certainly colluding. Biomedical science tends to assume that very different individuals have similar aspirations. The facile assumption is that everyone wants to live as long as possible, despite the extremes of social injustice and the enormous difficulties that some people face in just surviving from day to day, and the disturbing rates of suicide across the world. In this marvelous novel, Sarah Moss writes, "One should not take it for granted that the patient longs for what others consider perfect health." This is John Berger's drawing of the philosopher Simone Weil, who writes repeatedly about the importance of moral concentration, about what she called attention. Those who are unhappy have no need for anything in this world but people capable of giving them their attention. The capacity to give one's attention to a sufferer is a very rare and difficult thing. It is almost a miracle. It is a miracle. But no true effort of attention is ever wasted. In this wonderful book of essays, the Scottish poet Kathleen Jamie writes, like Simone Weil, that the needed commitment and concentration of listening and noticing comes close to the idea of prayer. Isn't that a kind of prayer? The care and maintenance of the web of our noticing, the paying heed. Eventually, and only after we have listened intently and given our full attention, doctors have the responsibility to provide what the great Irish novelist Sebastian Barry describes as the solace of an answer. In his novel, The Secret Scripture, Barry describes that strange responsibility we feel towards others when they speak, to offer them the solace of an answer. And when we look more closely at the meanings of that wonderful word solace, we can see immediately how relevant this is to the work of healthcare. Here is another of Jean Maux's photographs for A Fortunate Man. And Berger writes, you must forgive the exclusive personal pronoun in this quotation. It is the doctor's acceptance of what the patient tells him and the accuracy of his appreciation as he suggests how different parts of his life may fit together. It is this which then persuades the patient that he and the doctor and other men are comparable, because whatever he says of himself or his fears or his fantasies seem to be at least as familiar to the doctor as to him. He is no longer an exception. He can be recognized, and this is the prerequisite for cure or adaptation. Now, this recognition is a burdensome responsibility because it is powerful, as are the words we use when we search for that solacing answer. Remember this from the great Nigerian poet Nai Osundare: to utter is to alter. Now I must turn quickly to the issue of responsibility and health at the level of society. More than 2 centuries ago, in 1812, the young poet Percy Bysshe Shelley wrote, "The rich drive the poor into abjectness and then complain that they are abject." And nothing has changed in 200 years. American anthropologist Nancy Shepherd Hughes defines structural violence as violence that is permissible, even encouraged. It refers to the invisible social machinery of inequality that reproduces social relations of exclusion and marginalization via ideologies, stigmas, and dangerous discordance attendant to race, class, sex, and other invidious distinctions. Structural violence naturalizes poverty, sickness, hunger, and premature death, erasing their social and political origins so that they are taken for granted and no one is held accountable except the poor themselves. Structural violence is pervasive in the absence of social justice. And here from Michael Marmot's Institute of Health Equity in London is the documentation of the stark relationship between justice and health, with life expectancy according to neighbourhood income level in the pale green and disability-free life expectancy in the dark green, with an even steeper gradient between rich and poor. The more we discover and understand about the extent to which our life stories affect the workings of our bodies, the more we discover about the ways in which violence, abuse, and the stresses of poverty affect physiology, the more we understand the biology of biography, the more important our understanding of the detail of the lives of our patients becomes. Adverse child experiences early in childhood include physical, emotional, or sexual abuse, witnessing domestic violence, growing up with household substance abuse, mental illness, parental divorce, or an incarcerated household member, somebody in prison. Such experiences have been shown to predict future premature mortality to the extent that people with 6 or more adverse childhood experiences died nearly 20 years earlier on average than those without any. Each patient is unique in terms of their values, aspirations, and context. But even more fundamentally, each life's history and experience alters the way the body works through a multiplicity of mechanisms which include effects on the functioning of the nervous and endocrine systems and epigenetic effects on gene function. These processes have the greatest effects in response to early life experience, and they serve to accelerate or decelerate the natural aging of body cells. Socioeconomic inequality and the directly consequent unequal distribution of hope and opportunity play out in premature disease and death for those on the losing side. Just one example. Slow growth to the age of 7 years has been associated with an increased risk of unemployment in young men, regardless of their adult stature, thus producing a complex pattern of continuity between biological and psychosocial disadvantage. And yet, because of the current emphasis on individual lifestyle risk factors, we have ended up trying to treat the health effects of socioeconomic inequalities and other forms of structural and political violence with pharmaceuticals, which is surely destined to fail. Johanna Hedver again. There is a relationship between healing and justice because what oppresses us has also made us suffer trauma and its accompanying symptoms. Oppression, domination, and violence live first and foremost in our bodies. Our own freedom and our very reality depend upon the accuracy with which we are able to perceive the suffering around us, to bear witness to it, and to revolt against it. In the context of an unjust society, we all share this responsibility to perceive the suffering around us, to bear witness to it, and to revolt against it. Now, finally, the issue of responsibility and health at the level of the planet. Evaluate Pharma, one word, describes itself as an organization which brings senior decision makers within the pharmaceutical industry, provides senior decision makers within the pharmaceutical industry, with models of their sector from the viewpoint of the world's financial markets. And this is their report from last year. It's not, you will guess, it's not my usual reading matter, but you should always read your enemies. This report claims that worldwide prescription drug sales are forecasted to grow at a robust 6.5% compound annual growth rate through 2022 to reach $1.06 trillion. This represents what has been called the pharmaceuticalization of society, the transformation of human conditions, capabilities, and capacities into opportunities for pharmaceutical intervention. Disease used to be regarded as a misfortune, but is now seen as an opportunity for profit. Health was once seen as a blessing, but now it too has become an opportunity for profit. We must all remember that these enormous levels of profit depend entirely on all of us being persuaded to take more and more pharmaceuticals, either to treat our illnesses or to prevent us getting them. So what lies behind these optimistic profit predictions? The pressures of neoliberal capitalism, never to be underestimated, the commercial imperatives of the pharma industry, the seductive power of the new and of technology, guidelines-based pay for performance in healthcare, the intractable uncertainty of life and death, and the fear and greed of all of us. We struggle within a whirligig of greed, fear, wishful thinking, and vested interest, all of which are driving the medicalizing of society, the over-medicating of populations, and the overconsumption of medical products. In 2014, the Chem Trust produced this report. 613 pharmaceuticals have been reported in the environment worldwide. But analytical detection methods are not even available for many of the thousands of medicines in use. Rivers in all regions of the world are now contaminated with many medicines. In England, anti-inflammatories and painkillers, ibuprofen and diclofenac, have been found in fur taken from otters. In Sweden, samples of perch fish were found to be contaminated with 23 pharmaceuticals, including antidepressants such as Prozac, sedatives, antibiotics, painkillers, and anti-cancer drugs. Baltic Sea salmon have been found contaminated with ethinyl estradiol used in the contraceptive pill. This is the state of health in the environment. Happy fish or not. This impossibly complicated diagram from the US Environmental Protection Agency in its pre-Trump days, I have to say, I think it's probably been abolished, attempts to set out the environmental life cycle of pharmaceuticals. Every filled prescription ends up somewhere in this diagram. So as both patients and doctors, we need to think even more carefully about the use of medications of only marginal benefit, and perhaps particularly about preventive medications that are proportionately more likely to prove futile. So to conclude, this is John Singer Sargent's portrait of the writer Edmund Goss, and in Goss's autobiographical memoir published in 1907, he describes learning to concentrate my attention, to define the nature of distinctions, to see accurately, and to name what I saw. When thinking about health, this is the responsibility we all share. And I close with this great francophone poet from Martinique, Aimé Césaire. Beware my body and my soul, beware above all of crossing your arms and assuming the sterile attitude of the spectator. Because life is not a spectacle. Because a sea of sorrows is not a proscenium. Because a man who cries out is not a dancing bear. Anyone concerned about the health of individuals, of society, and of the planet has a grave responsibility not to assume the sterile attitude of the spectator. Instead, to see accurately and name what we see, and to struggle for a new convergence of science, ethics, and politics. Thank you very much. Thank you.